I fixed my son's fiance's car every Saturday for 4 months. She never once looked at me long enough to realize I was her future father-in-law. The morning it all changed, I was tightening a bolt under her Honda Civic when I heard her say, on speakerphone to her sister, "Once we're married, Marcus won't have to keep pretending he likes my family." I nearly dropped the wrench on my own face. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her over the radio playing in my shop. I hadn't. My name is Walter Briggs. I'm 58 years old, and I've run a small auto repair garage outside Tulsa, Oklahoma for almost 30 years. Long days, grease under the fingernails, the kind of work where nobody cares about your opinions as long as the engine turns over. My son Marcus is 29, good kid, works in commercial real estate downtown. And for the last 4 months, I'd been the anonymous mechanic fixing up his fiance's car every other Saturday morning, and she had absolutely no idea who I was. Here's how that happened. Marcus and I aren't estranged, exactly, but we're not close either. His mother, my ex-wife Diane, raised him mostly in the city while I kept the garage running 2 towns over. We see each other at holidays. Polite, distant. When Marcus got engaged to a woman named Sasha, I met her exactly once at a barbecue for maybe 20 minutes, wearing sunglasses because of a corneal scratch I was recovering from, and a Cardinals cap pulled low because it was 94 degrees out. She shook my hand, said, "Nice to meet you," and that was that. I doubt she remembered my face 5 minutes later. A few weeks after that barbecue, her Civic started making a grinding noise, and a mutual friend of Marcus's recommended a good cheap mechanic out past the county line. That mechanic was me. Small world, except it wasn't really a coincidence. I'd told that friend, half joking, that I wouldn't mind meeting my future daughter-in-law under more normal circumstances, one mechanic to one customer, and seeing what she was actually like when nobody was performing for family. He set it up without telling her who I was. I never corrected the record. At first, it felt harmless. Almost fun, honestly. Sasha came in every couple of weeks after that. Brakes, an oil change, a battery replacement. She was polite to me, the way people are polite to someone they've mentally filed under the help. She talked on the phone constantly while I worked, and I couldn't help but hear things. At first, it was ordinary stuff, complaints about her boss, wedding venue drama, normal noise. I told myself it was none of my business, and mostly, it wasn't. But the longer it went on, the more something started nagging at me. Not anything dramatic, small things. The way she talked about Marcus's mother like she was an obstacle to be managed rather than a person. The way she referred to Marcus's weekend plans as decisions she'd already made for him. One Saturday, she was on the phone with a wedding planner, and I heard her say, "Marcus doesn't really care either way, so just go with what I want." Marcus, for the record, cares about everything. He's the kind of guy who reads the fine print on his own coffee order. But I let it go. Everybody's a little pushy during wedding planning. I told myself that. I needed to believe it. Then came the Saturday that changed everything. It was overcast, threatening rain, and Sasha dropped her car off early, in a hurry, distracted. She sat in my little waiting area, scrolling her phone, when it rang. She answered on speaker without thinking, the way people do when they've forgotten someone else is in the room. It was her sister, Nicole. They talked about the bridesmaid dresses for a minute. Ordinary. Then Nicole asked something I didn't catch, and Sasha laughed, not a warm laugh, a satisfied one, and said the thing that stopped me cold. "Once we're married, Marcus won't have to keep pretending he likes my family. He'll just do what makes sense, which is spending holidays with mine, because mine actually matters for his career." A pause. Then, quieter, like she almost didn't want to say it out loud but couldn't help herself. "He doesn't know it yet, but once we're settled, his mom's going to see a whole lot less of him. It's better for everyone, honestly." I stood there with a torque wrench in my hand, staring at a Civic's undercarriage, feeling something shift in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet. Not anger. Not yet. Recognition. Because I'd heard this kind of talk before, decades ago, from Diane's mother before our marriage fell apart under the weight of two families constantly being weighed against each other on some invisible scale. I knew exactly what this kind of thinking could do to a marriage and to a son. When Sasha left that day, I sat in my office in the back of the shop for a long time before I called my brother, Curtis. Curtis is the closest thing I have to a Linda, the one person who tells me the truth even when I don't want it. I told him everything, and he went quiet on the other end of the line for so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he said, "Walt, you need to slow down and think about this like a mechanic, not like a father. Get the facts before you touch anything." That was good advice. Probably better than I deserved, because part of me already wanted to hate her. Not for anything she'd done yet, because I was scared. And fear turns fathers into dangerous people if you let it. So I decided to watch. Just watch. Nothing more. 2 weeks later, Sasha came back in for an inspection sticker. Same routine. Same distracted phone use. This time it was a call with a coworker, and I heard her mention something about the offer in Charlotte and not telling Marcus until it's finalized because he'll overthink it. My stomach tightened around a bolt I was turning. Charlotte, North Carolina. Almost 1,200 miles from Tulsa. Marcus had never once mentioned moving. Not in any conversation I'd had with him in months. That Sunday, Marcus came by the house for dinner. Like he did most weeks, even though things between us were only ever cordial, never easy. I made pot roast. We watched the Thunder game with the sound low. Comfortable. Normal. The kind of evening I always hoped he'd still want, even as an adult with his own life. At one point, helping me clear the table, I kept my voice casual. "How's the wedding planning coming?" He smiled, tired but happy. "Busy." We finally locked down the caterer. "That's good," I said. A few seconds passed. Then I asked, "You two thinking about staying in Tulsa after, or looking elsewhere?" "Staying, obviously," he said, like the question surprised him. "Why would we leave? My whole career's here." "Sasha loves Tulsa too." That answer hit me harder than I expected. I tried not to react. "You ever talk about other cities?" "Just curious." He shook his head. "Not really. Sasha's actually the one who says she could never leave too far from her family." I nearly dropped the plate I was holding. I didn't sleep much that night. Around 1 a.m. I called Curtis, because that's the kind of thing that can't wait for daylight when it's eating you alive. "You think she's lying to him?" he asked. "I think he doesn't know something," I said. "Maybe she hasn't told him yet." Neither of us said anything else, because we both understood what it would mean if she hadn't. Over the next couple of weeks, I started noticing a pattern. Not one big thing, a dozen small things. Sasha talked about decisions like they were already settled where they'd register, which insurance plan they'd use, how the finances would be structured, decisions Marcus had never mentioned discussing with her. One Saturday, she spent almost the entire appointment on the phone with a realtor, and it wasn't about a house in Tulsa. It was zip codes in Charlotte, school districts for someday, though neither of them had kids yet, commute times to a hospital system out there. Meanwhile, every time Marcus mentioned the future to me, it was rooted here, in Oklahoma, with his job, with his friends, with, honestly, me, even if neither of us said that part out loud. Two completely different futures, and only one of them knew about both. It started eating at me in ways I didn't like. I snapped at one of my guys in the shop over nothing. I apologized 5 minutes later. My hands weren't steady some mornings. Curtis finally told me straight, "Walt, you need facts, not fear. Facts." He was right. Guesses, no matter how good they feel, aren't proof of anything. A few days later, I got my first real piece of one. Sasha came in irritated, snapping at someone on the phone before she even sat down. Speaker again, the woman had zero instinct for privacy. "Did legal finalize the relocation package?" she asked. A pause. Then, "Good. And the offer letter's already signed on my end, so there's no backing out now." Another pause. Then colder. "I don't care if he takes it hard at first. Once we're out there, he'll adjust. Everyone adjusts." I felt every muscle in my back go tight over that transmission. Relocation package. Signed. Marcus had said nothing about any job offer, in Charlotte or anywhere else. Maybe he already knew. Maybe he didn't. I kept listening. The following Saturday, another piece dropped into my lap, not from spying, just from carelessness. Sasha spent nearly 35 minutes on a call that sounded like a strategy session. Joint accounts, asset protection, something about keeping my name on the deed regardless of what happens down the road. Most of it went over my head. Some of it didn't. At one point she said clear as day, "If things don't work out, I'm not walking away from this with nothing. That's non-negotiable." When she hung up, my hands were slick against the wrench I was holding. Not a prenup, exactly, worse, in a way. A woman quietly building an exit ramp before the wedding had even happened, while telling my son a completely different story. For about a week after that call, I started doubting myself the way I hadn't in years. Not because the FedEx disappeared, because they got harder to make sense of. If Sasha were cheating, or stealing, or lying about who she was, this would be simple. This wasn't simple. This was murkier, because on the surface, Sasha looked like a woman planning her future carefully. The problem was, all of that careful planning seemed to belong only to her. Then, one gray Saturday morning, something happened that nearly broke my composure completely. Sasha came in for a quick tire rotation, phone glued to her ear as usual, and I braced for another gut punch. Instead, I heard something different. Her voice softened in a way I hadn't heard before. "Hey, babe." I'd never heard that version of her. They talked about dinner plans, a movie, something funny that had happened at his office. She laughed a real laugh. Marcus laughed back through the phone, tinny and warm. For a moment, she genuinely seemed happy. When the call ended, I stood there, confused in a way that unsettled me more than the anger had. Because this was the real problem. Sasha wasn't faking all of it. She cared about him. I was sure of that. Which somehow made everything worse. People expect villains to be obvious. Real life rarely works that way. Sometimes people hurt the ones they love while sincerely believing they're doing the right thing. That truth sat with me the rest of the day. That night, I told Curtis everything over the phone while he half listened to his own ballgame in the background. When I finished, he asked, "So maybe she does love him?" "I think she does," I said. "So what's the actual problem, Walt?" I sat down at my kitchen table. "The problem is she thinks she already knows what's best for him, and she's never once asked what he wants." Curtis went quiet. Then, "Yeah, I've seen that before too." "That's not love, Walt. That's control wearing love's jacket." A few days later, another piece of the picture appeared, this time through pure arrogance rather than eavesdropping. Sasha spent almost 40 minutes on the phone in my waiting room, talking numbers. Investment accounts, retirement structuring, something about consolidating everything under one name for efficiency. Most of it was over my head. Some wasn't. At one point, she said, flatly, "Once Marcus stops second-guessing every financial decision, this gets a lot simpler." I nearly looked up from the transmission fluid. Stops second-guessing? Not if stops? Like it was inevitable. A few minutes later. "He doesn't need to keep splitting time between two households. It's inefficient." Something heavy settled in my chest. Marcus loved coming to my place on weekends. He'd told me more than once it was the one part of his week that felt like it was still just his. That weekend, Marcus stopped by alone, which had become rare enough that I noticed immediately. Diane was out of town, so it was just the two of us at the kitchen table with coffee. I told myself not to push. Then I failed at that, same as always. "How's the budget for the wedding looking?" I asked. He smiled. "Actually, pretty good." "You two keeping things separate for now, or already merging everything?" His smile faded a little. "Dad." "What? What?" He laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. "That's a weird question." I shrugged. "Just asking." He studied me a second too long. Then, "Is this about Sasha?" My stomach dropped. I tried to brush it off. Badly, apparently, because he crossed his arms immediately. "What's going on with you lately?" "Nothing." "Dad, I'm being careful." "About what?" I hesitated. "Mistake." He caught it instantly. His whole face changed. "You don't trust her." I opened my mouth, closed it, because there wasn't a good answer. He shook his head. "I knew it, Marcus." "No." His voice cracked slightly. "She's been nothing but good to me." I looked down at my coffee. "Maybe." The second I said it, I regretted it completely. Marcus pushed his chair back. Not dramatically, just enough. "You know what actually hurts?" I looked up. He looked exhausted, in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "Every single time something good happens in my life, I brace for you to find a reason it won't last." That landed. Hard. Because there was truth buried in it. Not all of it, but enough. The conversation ended badly. Worse than badly. By the time it was over, neither of us felt heard. For the next 10 days, he barely answered my calls. Some of the longest days I've had in years. Curtis tried to talk me down. It didn't help much. Every Saturday, I still fixed her car. Every night, I wondered if I'd already wrecked things with my son permanently. Then, just as I was ready to give up entirely, fate handed me something I couldn't ignore. Sasha came in one Thursday afternoon practically glowing, almost giddy. The second she sat down, she was on the phone. "It's all booked," she said. A pause, then a laugh. "No, he has no idea yet." My pulse kicked up. The call went on, and within 30 seconds I understood exactly why. Sasha had reserved a private event space at the Cedar Ridge Country Club for their engagement celebration. Nearly 90 guests, family, friends, coworkers, everyone who mattered in both their lives. Then came the part that turned my stomach. Sasha planned to use that exact event to announce publicly, in front of everyone, that they'd be relocating to Charlotte after the wedding because she'd already accepted a promotion transfer on Marcus's behalf in his career field at a competing firm arranged quietly through a contact of her father's. She framed it as a surprise, a gift, a grand romantic gesture. My grip tightened on the wrench in my hand because I finally understood something clearly. This was never about money. It wasn't about cheating. It wasn't even really about deception in the criminal sense. Sasha genuinely believed she had the right to make massive, life-altering decisions on my son's behalf. And if I wanted to stop this wedding from becoming a life sentence dressed up as a celebration, suspicion wasn't going to cut it. I needed proof. Marcus couldn't argue his way around. When Sasha climbed out of that Civic that afternoon, she smiled at me genuinely, easily, completely unaware that her own plan had just handed me exactly what I'd been looking for. For the first time since this whole mess started, I had something solid. Not proof that Sasha was a criminal, proof of a pattern of making enormous decisions for Marcus without ever once treating him like an equal partner in his own life. The hard part now was figuring out what to do with it, because simply telling him wasn't going to work. I'd already tried pushing once, and that kitchen table conversation showed me exactly how badly that could go. The harder I pushed, the harder he'd defend her. And honestly, I couldn't blame him for that. If somebody had criticized Diane before we got married, I probably would have done the same thing. Nobody likes being told they're wrong about someone they love. People have to see it themselves. A few days later, I met an old friend for breakfast. Ray Delgado, retired Tulsa PD detective. Someone I'd known almost 35 years, the kind of man who doesn't waste words unless they matter. We met at a diner off Riverside, same place we'd met once a month since he retired. Ray listened while I laid it all out, the calls, the hidden job transfer, the quiet financial maneuvering, the plan to announce the move publicly before Marcus even knew. When I finished, he took a slow sip of coffee. "You're looking for a smoking gun?" he said. "Maybe. You won't find one." That wasn't the answer I wanted. "What do you mean?" Ray shrugged. "Because people like this usually aren't criminals, Walt. They're just people who've convinced themselves they know better than everyone around them." That landed harder than I expected. "So what does that make her?" "Somebody who thinks she's smarter than the room." Ray leaned forward. "You don't need proof that Sasha's evil. You need proof that Marcus doesn't have the whole picture. Simple. Practical. Exactly the kind of advice Ray always gave. Driving home, I realized he was right. This was never about tearing Sasha down. It was about putting the truth in the light. Nothing more. Nothing less. The following weeks became a balancing act. Every other Saturday, I fixed her car. Every night, I asked myself if I was doing right by my son or just protecting my own fear. Some days I felt justified. Other days I felt like a nosy old man snooping on his son's fiancée for no good reason. I hated that feeling. More than once I considered shutting the whole arrangement down, telling the mutual friend to stop sending her my way. Then she'd walk back into my shop, and I'd remember exactly why I couldn't. One Saturday, she spent almost 20 minutes on the phone with a coworker, talking about once Marcus is settled out there like it was already decided. "He'll thank me eventually," she said. I remember that line clearly, because people who say things like that usually aren't listening to anyone but themselves. A few minutes later, "Honestly, he worries too much about staying close to his dad. It's a little much at his age." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because Marcus had spent his whole adult life building a relationship with me back from almost nothing, one Sunday dinner at a time, and she was talking about it like a phase he'd eventually grow out of. One morning, something happened that almost cracked my composure completely. Sasha came in unusually cheerful, and while I worked on her breaks, she actually spoke to me. Really spoke, for the first time in 4 months. "You married?" she asked. I almost laughed out loud. This woman had been sitting in my waiting room for 4 straight months and only just now noticed I existed as a person. 31 years, I said. "Wow," she nodded. "Any advice?" For a second, I considered telling her exactly what I thought. Instead, I said, "Listen more than you talk." She chuckled. "That's it? Worked for me." She smiled politely, then spent the next 10 minutes talking about herself. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. When I told Curtis that story later, he nearly choked on his beer. "You're kidding." "Wish I was." "After 4 months?" "4 months." He shook his head. "Walt, if this wasn't so serious, it'd be the funniest thing I've heard all year." Truth is, there were funny moments in all of it. Sasha treated me like part of the equipment. Talked about business, vacation plans, private arguments, all in front of the one person she should have been most careful around, her future father-in-law. The irony would have been hilarious if I hadn't been the one living it. As the engagement celebration got closer, I started quietly gathering documentation. Nothing illegal, nothing complicated, just facts. I confirmed the relocation package through a public job posting that matched the details I'd overheard. I verified the country club reservation. I cross-checked dates and timelines. I kept copies of texts Marcus had shown me over the months, comparing what he believed was happening with what I now knew actually was. Alone, none of it meant much. Together, it told one clear story, a story Sasha never intended for anyone to see. Meanwhile, Marcus and I stayed distant. Not fully broken, but different. Careful, polite. Every conversation felt like walking on thin ice, and that hurt more than I expected it to. One evening, Curtis found me sitting alone in my garage, not doing anything, just sitting, thinking, surrounded by tools I wasn't using. He leaned against the workbench. "You miss him?" I nodded. "Yeah." Curtis was quiet a moment. Then he said, "Whatever you do next, make sure it's for Marcus." "I am." "No." He shook his head gently. "Make sure it's not because you're angry." That stopped me cold, because the truth was, I was angry. Not just at Sasha, at myself, for not seeing it sooner, for letting things go this far, for risking my son's trust to fix something I couldn't guarantee would even be fixable. Curtis squeezed my shoulder and went back inside. I sat there another 20 minutes, turning his words over in my head. The next morning, Sasha came in for a last-minute alignment before the celebration, practically glowing with nerves and excitement. "Tomorrow's the big day," she said, checking her phone. "So I hear." She smiled. "Biggest night of my life so far." I kept my eyes on the paperwork. "Hope it goes well." "Oh, it will." The certainty in her voice was absolute. Then she laughed, almost to herself. "You know my fiancée has no idea what's coming?" My grip tightened slightly on my clipboard. "No, not even close." When I handed her the keys, she paused for just a second, looking at me directly, maybe for the first time in 4 months, like I was an actual person rather than furniture with a wrench. "Thanks, Walt." Hearing my own name out of her mouth felt strange. I nodded. "Anytime." She walked out to her car, adjusted her jacket, and drove off toward whatever she thought tomorrow was going to be. Tomorrow, she planned to unveil her perfect future. Tomorrow, she planned to show my son exactly who'd been designing it. Without him, the engagement celebration happened on a Saturday evening at the Cedar Ridge Country Club. Warm June air, clear skies. The kind of night people remember for the right reasons. Or at least, that was the plan. Curtis and I arrived a little before 6. The parking lot was already filling. Inside, the room looked beautiful, white linens, fresh flowers, soft lighting, a small band setting up near the entrance. Somebody had spent real money making this look perfect. Marcus looked happy. That was the hardest part. The second we walked in, he crossed the room and hugged me. And for one moment, he was 7 years old again. Same easy smile, same warmth, and I nearly lost my nerve completely. Almost, because as much as I wanted to protect him from pain, I couldn't protect him from the truth. Not anymore. The evening started normally. People mingled. Servers carried trays of appetizers. Guests laughed, told stories, caught up with each other. Sasha moved through the room like a woman running for office, shaking hands, telling jokes, soaking up compliments. More than once, I caught her glancing toward the small stage set up at the front of the room, waiting, preparing, getting ready for her big moment. Around 7:30, everyone started taking their seats. The room settled. Forks stopped clinking. Conversations faded out. Sasha stepped onto the stage holding a glass of champagne. The crowd applauded. Marcus stood beside her, smiling, completely in the dark. Sasha thanked everyone for coming. Then she gave a genuinely well-crafted speech. I'll give her that much. She talked about love, partnership, building a life together. She thanked Marcus, thanked both families, thanked co-workers and friends. People nodded along. A few even wiped their eyes. Then she got to the part she'd been waiting for. I've always believed life rewards people who make bold decisions, she said. The room quieted further. She smiled at Marcus. I wanted tonight to be unforgettable. Marcus laughed softly. What did you do? A few guests chuckled. Sasha turned back to the crowd. Then she said it. Marcus and I are beyond excited to start our next chapter together in Charlotte, North Carolina. Applause broke out instantly. For about 3 seconds. Then it started fading, because Marcus wasn't clapping. He wasn't smiling anymore either. He looked confused. I'm sorry, what? Sasha noticed. Her smile flickered. Just slightly. But it was enough. Marcus leaned in. What are you talking about? The microphone caught it. The whole room went silent. Sasha laughed, a little too nervously. The move. What move? A few guests exchanged glances. Sasha tried again. The job opportunity. Marcus stared at her. Then came the 4 words that changed the entire night. What job opportunity? Silence. Total silence. You could have heard a fork hit the floor. That was my moment. I stood up, slowly. No speech, no shouting, no scene. Just a 58-year-old father standing up beside a banquet table. Sasha looked at me, then looked again. Longer this time. Much longer. I watched recognition slowly form behind her eyes. Not all the way, just enough. Like a puzzle piece sliding into place. The voice, the face, the name. Her expression shifted. Walter? I nodded. Yeah. Her face went pale. A few guests looked confused. Marcus looked even more confused than she did. Sasha opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I spoke calmly. Marcus, before anyone makes any more announcements, I think there are a few questions worth asking. Nobody interrupted. Not even Sasha. Questions about what? Marcus asked quietly. I looked at him. Not her. Only him. When did Sasha tell you she'd accepted a job transfer in Charlotte? Marcus turned to Sasha. She said nothing. That silence answered plenty on its own. I continued. When did she tell you she'd already looked into neighborhoods out there? No answer. When did she tell you she'd started planning your move? Still nothing. The room felt frozen. Sasha finally stepped forward. Walter, this isn't the place. I looked at her steadily. Isn't it? That landed harder than I meant it to. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Marcus crossed his arms. His voice was calm now. Too calm. When were you going to tell me? Sasha swallowed. I was going to. When? No answer. The silence stretched on. Sasha tried to pivot. It was supposed to be a surprise. Marcus shook his head slowly. A surprise? Vacation is a surprise. Moving across the country isn't. I could see panic creeping into her eyes now. The confident speaker from 15 minutes ago was disappearing fast. I reached into my jacket pocket and handed Marcus a small stack of printed pages. Nothing secret, nothing illegal. Just copies of everything I'd verified over the past month. Job posting details, housing research, planning timelines, dates, facts. Marcus looked through them slowly, page by page. Each one telling the same story. A future built without him in the room. Sasha started talking, explaining, justifying, trying to reframe everything. But the more she talked, the worse it sounded, because every explanation revealed the same thing. She hadn't asked, she hadn't discussed, she had decided. Finally, Marcus looked up. His eyes were wet, but not from heartbreak, from clarity, the painful kind. You kept saying our future, he said quietly. Sasha opened her mouth. He didn't let her finish. But every decision in it was yours. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Marcus slid the ring off his finger. Slowly, carefully, he set it down on the table in front of her. The room seemed to stop breathing. I loved you, he said quietly. I know, Sasha answered. For the first time all night, she sounded honest. Maybe she was. Marcus nodded. I think you did. Then he looked at her directly. But you never once respected me enough to let me make my own decisions. Those words hit harder than anything else that night because they were true. Sasha wasn't a monster. She wasn't a criminal. She hadn't even faked loving him. The problem was simpler and sadder than that. She liked being in charge more than she liked being his partner. 10 minutes later, she left alone. No shouting, no scene, no dramatic exit. Just a woman carrying the weight of her own choices out the door. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Marcus was hurt, embarrassed, angry. Some of that anger landed on me, and honestly, I didn't fight it. Healing takes time. So does trust. But slowly, things got better. 3 months later, he put in for a promotion he'd been quietly wanting for over a year. One that finally used the finance degree he'd worked so hard for, instead of just his sales instincts. He signed a lease on a small place near downtown Tulsa, nothing fancy, just his. And for the first time in a long while, he looked like a man genuinely excited about his own future again, instead of someone bracing for it. One Sunday afternoon, he came by for dinner, the way he used to before all this. While we cleared the table together, he looked over at me and smiled. You know something, Dad? What? You were annoying. I laughed. Just annoying? Extremely annoying. That's fair. He nudged my shoulder. Then added, quieter. But thank you. That was enough. More than enough. Looking back, I've realized something about fatherhood I wish I'd understood sooner. For most of my life, I thought protecting my son meant solving his problems for him. It doesn't. Sometimes it just means showing someone the truth and trusting them to decide what to do with it. If you've ever stood in a situation where telling the truth risked the relationship you were trying to protect, then you probably already know how impossible that decision can feel. Sometimes it's still worth it anyway. Thank you for listening to my story. Sometimes love shows up disguised as a checklist, quietly deciding what's best for someone else without ever asking. Real love asks first. It listens more than it plans. And sometimes the bravest thing a father can do isn't fixing the road ahead for his child, but simply turning on the headlights and letting them choose which way to drive. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI purely for entertainment, though we hope its simple life lesson still found a way to warm your heart.